Billionaire sees his maid humiliated in a blind date with only $5. What he did next is hard to believe. Sometimes life puts us in moments so cruel, they strip us down to nothing. A girl who had only $5 in her purse walked into a blind date, hoping for kindness, but instead walked into humiliation. She didn't know that someone else was watching, a man whose decision that night would change her life forever. If you are going beyond this part, please comment where you are from and press like and subscribe. It was Friday evening, the kind of evening when restaurants were filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and couples leaning close across tables. Inside La Belle, one of the city's most expensive restaurants, a young woman sat nervously at a corner table. Her name was Maria, and though she wore her best dress, a faded blue one she had ironed 3 times, she knew she didn't belong in a place like this. The chandeliers sparkled too brightly, the waiters moved too gracefully, and every sound reminded her she wasn't part of this world. Maria worked as a maid in a billionaire's mansion. She spent her days scrubbing marble floors and polishing furniture that cost more than her entire life savings. But tonight wasn't about work. A friend had convinced her to go on a blind date. "Come on, Maria," her friend had said. "You deserve love too. Just one evening. Who knows? Maybe he'll like you." So she had agreed. But she had only $5 in her purse, carefully folded and hidden inside. It was all she could spare, and she prayed it would be enough for at least a small drink. Across the table, her date finally arrived. A tall man in a sharp suit, gold watch flashing under the light. He looked her up and down once, his smile thin and amused. "You're Maria?" he asked, almost laughing at the name. "Yes," she said softly. He sat, waved the waiter over, and ordered without asking her preference. Steak, the most expensive one, and a bottle of wine. Maria's heart sank. She couldn't even afford a glass of water here. She forced a polite smile, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. As the evening went on, the man grew more arrogant. He talked about his car, his travels, his money. Finally, when the bill arrived, the waiter placed it neatly in the middle of the table. The man leaned back. "So, how are we splitting this?" Maria froze. Her hands turned cold. I only have," she whispered, pulling out her $5 bill. The man stared, then burst into laughter so loud that heads turned. $5 in La Belle? You came to a blind date with $5? Unbelievable! Maria's face burned red. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. The waiter's eyes softened, but the man's voice cut through like a knife. "You should have stayed home. Girls like you, this isn't your world." What Maria didn't know was that at a table not far away, a man was watching everything, quietly, carefully. His name was Adrian Blackwood, a billionaire known for his ruthless business empire. But tonight, he wasn't the businessman. Tonight, he was simply a man who saw something he couldn't ignore. The pain in his maid's eyes as her dignity was torn apart. And in that moment, Adrian made a decision. Adrian Blackwood was used to many things: success, respect, and control. In his world, people didn't laugh at him, and no one dared to embarrass him. But as he sat at his table that evening, sipping his wine and pretending to read a report on his phone, he found himself more focused on Maria than on anything else. Maria, the quiet girl who worked in his mansion, she dusted the grand staircase every morning, polished the crystal vases in the hallway, and kept the kitchen spotless no matter how many guests he entertained. She never asked for attention, never complained. She moved like a shadow, always careful, always humble. Adrian had noticed her long ago, not in the way of a man looking at a woman, but in the way of a man trying to understand something rare. She was different. Even when she was tired, she smiled. Even when the other maids whispered about her poor clothes or her long hours, Maria only answered with kindness. And now, here she was, sitting across from a man who treated her like dirt. Adrian's jaw tightened as he watched her slip the $5 bill across the table, her hand trembling. The way the arrogant man laughed at her, loud, cruel, merciless, made Adrian's blood boil. The laughter echoed inside him. For someone like Adrian, who had built an empire brick by brick, the sight of dignity being torn away so casually was unbearable. He clenched his glass. How dare he? Adrian had seen many kinds of arrogance. He had seen men destroy businesses, ruin families, and step on the weak just to climb higher. But this, mocking a woman who was clearly struggling, humiliating her in public, this struck something deeper. Memories flashed in his mind. His mother's hands, calloused from working double shifts so he could study. The shame he had once felt as a boy when other kids laughed at his worn shoes. The humiliation of being told, "You don't belong here." Maybe that was why Maria's pain hit him so hard. He saw his own past in her lowered eyes. The arrogant man leaned forward again, smirking. "Honestly, this is pathetic. $5? Were you planning to buy a soda and run?" Maria's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She folded her hands together tightly, as if holding herself together piece by piece. Adrian's patience snapped. He put his phone down, stood up, and walked toward their table. Every head turned as the billionaire, tall, composed, dressed in a sleek black suit, crossed the room with calm authority. Maria looked up, startled. Her eyes widened as she recognized him. Mr. Blackwood?" she whispered, her voice small with shock. Adrian gave her a faint, reassuring nod, then turned his cold gaze on the man across from her. "And who finds it amusing to humiliate a lady in public?" His jaw tightened. His arrogance melted into nervous laughter. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" Adrian's eyes narrowed. "You mocked a woman for having $5. Do you know how much dignity is worth? More than all the wine in this place." Silence fell over the restaurant. Waiters froze. Customers stared. Maria's face burned even hotter, but this time it wasn't from shame, it was from disbelief. Adrian slipped a black card from his wallet and handed it to the waiter without looking. He said, "Put their meal on me." Then turning back to Maria, his tone softened. "Maria, you shouldn't spend another second here." The man tried to speak again, but Adrian's glare silenced him. "Leave," Adrian ordered. The man swallowed hard, grabbed his coat, and stumbled out of the restaurant, his pride shredded. For the first time that evening, Maria lifted her eyes. She looked at Adrian, her lips parting to speak, but no words came. Gratitude, confusion, and fear all swirled inside her. Adrian leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "You don't owe me anything, but remember this. Your worth is not measured by the money in your purse." And with that, he offered her his hand. Maria hesitated. She had never been touched by kindness in such a place, by someone like him. Slowly, almost as if testing reality, she placed her trembling hand in his. Adrian led her out of the restaurant, his expression calm, but inside his chest, something unexpected stirred. Anger, yes, but also protectiveness, and a question he couldn't shake. Why does it matter so much to me what happens to her?
The night air outside the restaurant was cool, carrying the faint hum of traffic and the glow of street lamps. Maria stepped out, her thin blue dress fluttering against the breeze. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her trembling heart. Adrian walked beside her, silent at first. He didn't rush her with questions, didn't demand explanations. He simply kept pace, his tall frame a shield between her and the world that had just mocked her. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what to say. You shouldn't have." Adrian stopped and turned to her. His eyes, sharp in business meetings, now softened. "You don't have to say anything. What happened in there wasn't your fault. Don't carry shame that doesn't belong to you." Her throat tightened. She had always been the girl who carried burdens quietly, who swallowed tears and turned them into silence. No one had ever told her she didn't have to. "I should go," she said quickly, glancing at the bus stop down the road. I can't take more of your time." But Adrian shook his head. "The bus won't come for another hour. Let me drive you home." Maria froze. The thought of sitting in his sleek black car, of being seen next to him, made her stomach twist. "No, I can't trouble you." Adrian's lips curved faintly, but his tone was steady. "Maria, I don't offer what I don't mean. Come." Against every instinct telling her to stay invisible, Maria followed. His car, a gleaming black Mercedes, waited by the curb. The chauffeur stepped aside as Adrian opened the door for her himself, something no one would expect from the untouchable billionaire. Inside, the leather seats smelled of luxury she could never imagine affording. Maria sat stiffly, clutching her small purse with both hands, as if it held her last piece of dignity. For a while, they rode in silence. The city lights slid across the windows, painting fleeting patterns on her face. Adrian studied her quietly. There was fragility in her posture, yes, but also strength in the way she kept her chin up despite everything. Finally, he spoke. "Why did you agree to meet him?" Maria hesitated, then sighed. "My friend thought maybe if I went on a date, I'd feel less alone." She gave a bitter laugh. "But I guess even loneliness is easier than humiliation." Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her words hit him harder than he expected. Loneliness. He knew that feeling well. His empire was vast, his mansion full of staff, but his nights were hollow. Money had bought him power, but not connection. "You're not someone to be humiliated," he said quietly. Maria turned to him, eyes shining in the dim light. "With $5, Mr. Blackwood, the world doesn't see much else." Adrian met her gaze, and for a heartbeat neither looked away. There was something raw in her honesty, something he rarely saw in people who surrounded him. When they reached her small apartment building, Maria quickly unbuckled her seatbelt. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered, already halfway out the door. Adrian wanted to say more. He wanted to tell her she deserved more than thank yous and scraps of kindness, but he knew pushing her now would break the fragile trust between them. Instead, he simply nodded. "Get some rest, Maria." She disappeared into the shadows of the old building, her figure small against the cracked walls and flickering stairwell light. Adrian sat in the car longer than he intended, staring at the doorway she had entered. Something restless stirred in his chest, a mix of anger and determination. He had seen her pain. He had felt her humiliation as if it were his own. And though Maria might refuse pity, Adrian knew this wasn't pity. It was something deeper. As the car pulled away, he made a silent vow. "This isn't the end of her story. Not while I have the power to change it.
Maria's apartment was quiet when she stepped inside. The only sound came from the soft ticking of a clock on the wall and the faint hum of a small refrigerator that often stuttered before it started working again. She set her worn purse down on the counter and leaned against the door, exhaling the tension she had held in all night. The moment the door closed, her strong front crumbled. Tears she had been holding back slipped down her cheeks, falling silently onto her dress. She quickly wiped them away. She couldn't afford the luxury of breaking down. From the back bedroom came a soft voice. "Maria, is that you?" Maria straightened immediately. "Yes, Mama, it's me." Her mother, Rosa, was frail and pale, lying in bed with a blanket pulled up to her chin. Illness had taken much of her strength, leaving her unable to work. Maria walked over, sitting beside her with a smile she forced for her mother's sake. "How was your evening?" Rosa asked, her eyes kind but searching. Maria hesitated, then shook her head with a small laugh. "Oh, just nothing important. How are you feeling?" Rosa studied her daughter's face, seeing through the mask, but she didn't push. She reached out, placing a weak hand over Maria's. "You work too hard, mija, always carrying the world on your shoulders." Maria lowered her gaze, blinking fast. "I don't mind. You're my world." She meant it. Every shift she worked at Adrian Blackwood's mansion, every dollar she saved, every sacrifice she made, it was all for the woman who had raised her alone after her father died. But life had never been kind to them. Maria had once been a bright student. Teachers had praised her intelligence, telling her she had a future that could outshine the stars. She had dreamed of becoming a teacher herself, of helping children discover the joy of learning. Then her mother had fallen ill. The medical bills piled up, and with no father to help, Maria dropped out of college. She took on any work she could find, cleaning offices, waiting tables, scrubbing floors, until one day she heard of a position in the Blackwood mansion. The pay was better than anything else, and though the thought of serving in a billionaire's house made her feel small, she took it. She remembered her first day there. The mansion had felt like another world. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, polished silver. She had felt out of place, but she had promised herself one thing. "I will work with dignity, no matter what job I do." And she had. Every corner she cleaned, every dish she washed, she did with pride, because it meant medicine for her mother, food on their table, and a roof over their heads. Now, sitting by her mother's bedside, Maria smiled softly, even as her chest ached. "I'm okay, Mama, I promise." But deep down, she wasn't okay. Tonight's humiliation replayed in her mind, the laughter, the stares, the cruel words. $5. That was all the world saw in her. What she didn't know was that Adrian Blackwood, the man she worked for, had gone home that same night, carrying her pain like it was his own. In his mansion, he sat alone in his vast study, the glow of the fireplace flickering across his sharp features. The silence pressed in around him, heavy and suffocating. He had money, power, influence, but none of it could erase the image of Maria sitting small and broken in that restaurant. Adrian poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. Instead, he stared out the window at the city skyline, his mind restless. "Why does it matter so much?" he wondered. "She's just my maid." But the more he told himself that, the less he believed it. Because Maria wasn't just anything. She was more than the faded dress she wore, more than the $5 she carried. He had seen her resilience every day, working quietly, carrying burdens without complaint. And for the first time in years, Adrian Blackwood felt something stir inside him that no business deal or fortune could give him. An urge to protect, to lift someone else out of the shadows. He leaned back in his chair, his decision forming like steel in his mind. He wouldn't let Maria fight this battle alone anymore.
The next morning, Maria slipped quietly into the Blackwood mansion, her uniform freshly pressed, though it was beginning to wear thin at the seams. She walked quickly, head bowed, trying to bury the memory of last night's humiliation deep inside her. The grand halls were as polished as ever, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto marble floors. For most of the staff, it was just another day. But for Maria, her heart beat faster with every step, especially when she heard her name, Maria. She turned, startled, and found herself face to face with Mr. Adrian Blackwood. He stood at the base of the staircase, crisp in a charcoal suit, his presence commanding as always. But today, there was something different in his eyes. Something softer. "Yes, sir," she asked, her voice careful. "I'd like to see you in my study," he said simply. Her stomach dropped. The study was his private sanctuary. No maid was ever called there unless something serious had happened. Fear ran through her. Did I do something wrong? Did he regret helping me last night? She followed him through the long hallway, her shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. The heavy oak door closed behind them, and suddenly it was just the two of them in the vast room lined with bookshelves and the faint scent of leather. Adrian gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Please, sit." Maria hesitated. She had never sat in front of him before, not like this. Usually, she stood quietly in the background, unnoticed. Sitting felt wrong, but his gaze left no room for argument. She perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Adrian leaned forward, studying her carefully. "Maria, about last night." Her cheeks flushed instantly. "Please, sir, you don't have to mention it. I don't want—" "I do," Adrian interrupted gently, his tone calm but firm. "I saw what happened. I saw how he treated you." Her throat tightened. Shame flooded her again, hot and suffocating. "I should never have gone. I should have known better." Adrian's jaw hardened. "No, you should have been treated with respect, no matter where you went. That man's arrogance is not your fault." Maria blinked fast, fighting the sting in her eyes. She didn't want his pity. Pity was salt on wounds she had learned to carry alone. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, "I appreciate what you did, but I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me." Adrian studied her in silence. Most people would have grasped at his help, begged for his favor. But not Maria. Even in her pain, she clung to her pride. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower now. "Maria, I'm not offering pity. I'm offering possibility." She looked up, startled. "Possibility?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Tell me something. If your life were different, if you didn't have to worry about bills or everything else, what would you do?" Maria hesitated. No one had asked her that in years. Dreams had become luxuries she couldn't afford. But something about his steady gaze drew the truth from her lips. "I'd finish school," she said softly. "I always wanted to be a teacher, to help children learn, to give them the chance I almost had. For a moment, the study was silent. Then, Adrian nodded slowly, as though he had just confirmed something he already suspected. "You deserve that chance, and more," he said firmly. Maria shook her head, her pulse racing. "Please, don't say things like that. You don't know me. I'm just your maid." Adrian's eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "Maria, you are not just anything." Her breath caught. The words struck her like a lightning bolt, lighting something deep inside she had long buried. Hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope was fragile. She looked down quickly, clutching her hands tighter. I should get back to work." Adrian let her go, though his gaze lingered as she stood and slipped out of the study. When the door closed behind her, he leaned back in his chair, his mind already moving. She would resist his help, he knew that. But Adrian Blackwood wasn't a man who took no for an answer, not when it came to business, and not when it came to the quiet dignity of a woman who had been humiliated for having only $5. If Maria wouldn't let him help her openly, he would find another way.
The following week, Maria's days unfolded as they always did, long hours of polishing, cleaning, and keeping the mansion running in perfect order. She carried herself the same way, quietly, efficiently, never drawing attention. But beneath her calm, her thoughts tangled endlessly. Adrian's words wouldn't leave her. "You are not just anything." No one had ever spoken to her like that, and though she tried to dismiss it, her heart clung to the memory as if it were a fragile flame in the dark. One evening, after finishing her shift, Maria returned to her small apartment. She pushed open the door, expecting the usual silence and faint smell of medicine, but instead, she found her mother sitting up straighter than usual, her cheeks flushed with color. "Maria," Rosa said, her voice stronger than it had been in months, "something happened today. A doctor came." Maria froze. "A doctor?" "Yes," Rosa continued, her eyes shining. "He said someone arranged for me to receive treatment at St. Clair's Hospital, the best one in the city. They're going to cover the cost. I don't understand it, mija. Who would do this for us?" Maria's knees almost gave out. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. That can't be right. We could never afford it." But Rosa held her hand, tears gathering in her eyes. "Whoever it was, they wanted us to have hope again." Maria's mind raced. Who could it be? She had no relatives with money, no friends wealthy enough to afford such generosity. And then, unbidden, a thought slipped in. Mr. Blackwood. Her chest tightened. Could it really be him? But why would a billionaire care about the health of his maid's mother? Maria brushed the thought aside. It was impossible. It had to be some kind of mistake. Yet when she looked into her mother's brightened eyes, she couldn't bring herself to question the gift. That night, as Rosa slept peacefully, Maria stood by the window of their apartment, gazing out at the glowing city. For the first time in years, she felt a weight lifting, even if she didn't understand how. Meanwhile, across town, Adrian Blackwood sat in his office, reviewing documents his assistant had placed on his desk. They weren't business contracts. They were hospital arrangements, insurance coverage, and education program forms. "Make sure it stays anonymous," Adrian instructed quietly. "She mustn't know where it's coming from." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, with respect, most people would want credit for this, especially you." Adrian looked up, his eyes cold as steel. "This isn't about credit. It's about dignity. Do it quietly." The assistant nodded and left. When Adrian was alone again, he allowed himself a rare smile. He could imagine Maria's shock when her mother received proper care. She would never thank him, because she wouldn't know it was him. And that was how he wanted it. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was giving her back pieces of the life she had been forced to sacrifice. And he wasn't done yet. A week later, Maria was cleaning the library when Adrian entered. He moved with his usual quiet authority, but his eyes flickered toward her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Maria," he said, almost casually, "do you read?" She blinked. "Read, sir?" "Yes, books. Do you enjoy them?" Her lips parted, surprised. I used to, before life got in the way." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Then take one, from here." She froze, staring at the towering shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. "Sir, I could never—" "Take one," he repeated, his voice steady. "And when you finish, take another. Consider it part of your wages." Maria hesitated, then slowly reached for a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. She held it carefully, as though it were treasure. That night, when she opened the book in her small apartment, the words carried her into another world, one where women found love, dignity, and choice. She read until her eyes grew heavy, a faint smile resting on her lips. She didn't know Adrian had chosen that book himself, sliding it to the edge of the shelf earlier that day. Nor did she know that in another quiet gesture, he had already enrolled her in evening classes at a local community college, her tuition mysteriously marked as paid in full. Maria only knew one thing. For the first time in years, life no longer felt like a prison. It felt possible.
The restaurant slowly emptied, but Maria remained frozen at the table, her $5 bill trembling in her hand. Her blind date had already stormed out, muttering insults about cheap girls, leaving her with the humiliation and the stares of strangers. She wanted to cry, but she held herself together. Years of hardship had taught her one thing. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in public. Then, a shadow fell across the table. Maria looked up, startled, and her breath caught. Adrian Blackwood stood there, tall and commanding, his dark suit perfectly tailored. He didn't look like he belonged to this world. He looked like he owned it. "Maria," he said softly, surprising her by using her name. "I'll take care of the bill. Don't worry." She flushed, shame burning through her chest. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't know you were here. Please, I can't let you—" But he raised a hand, silencing her. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that silenced even the curious waiters. "You deserve respect, and tonight someone forgot to give it to you." Maria swallowed hard, fighting back tears. No one had ever defended her like this, not once. The waiter approached with the bill, his eyes flicking nervously between them. Adrian slid his black card across the table, his gaze never leaving Maria's. "And bring dessert, something special." Maria's eyes widened. "Dessert? I can't eat now." "You will," Adrian interrupted gently, "because you don't leave a place like this with your head down. You'll leave with dignity. That's not a request." His tone wasn't harsh, but it left no room for argument. Maria sat back, stunned. For the first time all evening, she didn't feel small. Meanwhile, just outside, her arrogant blind date was boasting to friends on the phone about the pathetic maid who tried to date him. What he didn't know
was that the man inside, the one protecting her, was his boss's boss. And soon, his laughter would turn into regret. The waiter returned with a delicate chocolate soufflé, plated with gold leaf. Maria stared at it, afraid to touch it. Desserts like this cost more than a week of her salary. Adrian leaned slightly forward. "Eat, Maria." Her hands shook as she picked up the spoon. When she tasted it, her eyes widened. She had never eaten anything so rich, so decadent. For a moment, the pain of humiliation faded, replaced by a quiet sweetness. Adrian watched her silently. His sharp eyes, so feared in boardrooms, softened. He had seen her mop floors, polish silver, and work late into the night without a single complaint. Tonight, he saw her as more than an employee. He saw a young woman who deserved so much more than what life had handed her. "Maria," he said after a pause, his voice low, "you'll never let anyone treat you like that again. Do you understand?" She blinked at him, confused. "But people like him, people with money, they always—" "Money doesn't buy character, and tonight proved it." Maria set down her spoon, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Why are you doing this for me?" Adrian leaned back, his gaze steady. "Because sometimes the right person needs a little reminder of their worth, and tonight you're that person." Her heart pounded. She didn't know what to say. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, she felt seen.
The next morning, the city's tallest glass tower reflected the rising sun like a blade. Inside, the headquarters of Blackwood Enterprises was already buzzing. Employees rushed between meetings, interns balanced stacks of papers, and executives whispered nervously about the CEO's unpredictable mood. At the top floor, in an office that stretched wider than most departments, Adrian Blackwood sat behind his mahogany desk. His face was unreadable as he flipped through reports. But in his mind, he replayed the image of Maria's humiliation the night before, her trembling hands holding out a $5 bill, and the cruel laughter that had followed. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant said carefully, "your division head, Mr. Carter, is here for the quarterly review." Adrian's eyes sharpened. Mr. Carter, the very same man who had mocked Maria in front of a room full of strangers. The same man who called her pathetic and walked out, leaving her broken. "Send him in," Adrian said, his voice dangerously calm. Mr. Carter entered confidently, his gold watch gleaming, his suit impeccable. He carried the swagger of a man who thought he had earned his place in the world. "Good morning, sir," Carter said with a rehearsed smile. "I've prepared the revenue breakdown." "Sit." The word was sharp, cold. Carter froze, his smile slipping for a fraction of a second. He sat. Adrian leaned back, his piercing gaze cutting through the silence. "Tell me, Carter, how was your dinner last night?" "Dinner? Oh, it was fine." "Fine?" Adrian repeated, softly, almost dangerously. "I was there, at La Belle." The color drained from Carter's face. "I saw how you treated the woman you were with. You laughed at her. You humiliated her. For what? Because she had $5 in her purse?" Carter stammered, "Sir, I didn't know she was—" "My maid," Adrian finished for him, his voice rising just slightly. "No, Carter, that's not the point. You didn't know who she was, and yet you chose cruelty. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Carter's hands trembled. "Mr. Blackwood, please, I didn't mean—" "Enough!" Adrian's hand slammed down on the desk, making Carter jump. "You represent my company, my name, and if this is how you treat people you think are beneath you, then you don't deserve to sit in this office." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Outside the glass walls, employees were slowing down, sensing something monumental unfolding. Adrian's voice dropped, deadly calm now. "Pack your things. You're finished here." Carter's face twisted in panic. "Sir, please, I have a family." "And Maria had her dignity," Adrian cut in sharply. "You stole it from her last night, and I will not have a man like you on my payroll." Tears of desperation filled Carter's eyes as security approached the office door. For the first time, the arrogant man who had laughed so easily looked small, powerless. Adrian stood, his towering frame casting a shadow over Carter. "Remember this day, Carter. Money may impress fools, but how you treat people who have nothing, that's what defines you. Now get out." Carter stumbled out of the office, his career in ruins. The whispers spread through the building like wildfire. Adrian Blackwood had just destroyed one of his own executives, not for profit, not for betrayal of business, but for humiliating a maid. That afternoon, Maria returned to the mansion, still unsure how to face her boss after what had happened. But when she entered, she found Adrian waiting, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "It's done," he said simply. "What's done?" she asked, confused. "The man who humiliated you. He won't hurt anyone again, not under my name." Maria's eyes widened. You fired him? Because of me?" "Not because of you," Adrian said firmly. "Because of what's right." And for the first time in her life, Maria felt something she had never known before. The weight of her worth.
The next few days felt unreal to Maria. She had expected her life to return to normal, scrubbing marble floors, dusting chandeliers, keeping her head down. But nothing was the same anymore. Word had spread among the staff that Adrian Blackwood, the untouchable billionaire, had fired one of his top executives for humiliating her. Every maid, every butler, every gardener looked at her differently now, not with pity, but with quiet respect. Still, Maria's heart was heavy. She had never wanted to be the reason anyone lost their job, no matter how cruel they were. And she didn't know how to face Adrian. He wasn't just her employer anymore. He was the man who had stood up for her when no one else ever had. One evening, as she was polishing the silver in the grand dining hall, Adrian walked in. His presence filled the room instantly. Maria froze, her reflection trembling in the polished tray she held. "Maria," he said softly. She set the tray down, her hands clasped nervously. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood?" "Adrian," he corrected gently. "Call me Adrian." She blinked, startled. I can't. Your employer?" He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "That's true. But more importantly, I'm someone who believes you deserve better than the life you've been forced into." Maria's breath caught. "Why? Why me?" Adrian studied her for a long moment, then spoke. "Because I've built empires, Maria. I've stood on stages, signed billion-dollar contracts, been praised and feared. But none of it matters if I turn a blind eye to cruelty. That night at LaBelle, I saw something that shook me more than any boardroom war. I saw a young woman holding her last $5 and still carrying herself with dignity, even as the world tried to strip it away. That kind of strength is rare. Tears filled Maria's eyes. She had never heard words like these, not directed at her. I don't want you to just be my maid anymore. I want to give you choices, education, freedom, a life where you never have to count your last dollar again. Maria's lips trembled. I don't want your pity, Adrian. His gaze softened, and for the first time there was something vulnerable in his eyes. This isn't pity. It's respect, and maybe more than that. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unsaid words. Maria's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Months later, Maria's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Adrian enrolled her in business classes, encouraging her to follow her dreams. She discovered a passion for design, and with Adrian's support, she launched a small startup that quickly grew. She was no longer the maid scrubbing floors. She was Maria, confident, capable, unafraid. One evening, she returned to the Bell, the same restaurant where she had once been humiliated. But this time, she didn't walk in with $5 in her purse. She walked in on Adrian's arm, wearing a dress she had designed herself. Heads turned, not in mockery, but in admiration. The waiter who had pitied her before smiled warmly. "Welcome back, ma'am." Maria's eyes glistened. For her, it wasn't about the wealth or the glamour. It was about dignity restored, respect earned, and a life she had built with courage, and a little help from someone who believed in her. As she sat across from Adrian, their eyes met, and he gave her a small, knowing smile. What he did next, Maria thought to herself, was really hard to believe.